So we're talking about cognitive distortions today. And last week, part one, the first thing we did is we went over what some of these main cognitive distortions are. And this is really helpful with neurodivergence because a lot of times these cognitive distortions are basically adaptations in certain environments. It could be thinking patterns that at one point might have kept us safe. It might have protected us from something, or it might have been part of us masking in a world that's maybe not built for neurodivergence because we're not the majority, right? You're going to build the world for the majority. And when we're 3 to 8% of the population, some of the stuff may not apply to us. And if you've had trauma, right, if you've had other things, so these cognitive distortions at one point likely kept you safe or protected you from something in your environment. And now as adults where we have more control over that and we have more skills and we don't need to mask anymore, we can start to unpack some of these and be able to see things a little bit more clearly or the way we want them to. So as a reminder, the call before was going through the cognitive distortions, and then part two is going to be how do we kind of unpack this? And so last time we went through, and by the way, the first step in unpacking this is to recognize you're in one. And that's like the hardest step there is to recognize you're in a cognitive distortion because it's a thinking pattern that we can go into. And so one of the biggest ones that we can experience with neurodivergence being ADHD, especially if you've had trauma, if you have substance abuse history, is all or nothing or black and white thinking. So I'm going to do a quick overview of these again, if you weren't on the first one, or just to remind you, and then we'll go into how are we unpacking these. So all or nothing thinking, right? Absolutes, black and white. It's either perfect or I'm not going to do it at all. This is either a safe person or a dangerous person, right? I love this person or I don't want to be around them at all. I got to go all out or I'm not going to start. And then we have overgeneralization. So a negative event is a never-ending pattern of defeat. So one bad thing happens and now that's how it's always going to be. Mental filter, dwell on the negatives, ignore the positives, which I know a lot of us do. What could we do better at versus like what are we proud of? Discounting the positives, insist that our accomplishments or positive qualities don't count. Jump into conclusions, so mind reading, assuming that people are reacting negatively to us when there's no evidence of this. And we talked about last week that this is in a way like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is like fear of rejection on steroids. And so when someone's even neutral, sometimes we can assume that's negative. We can assume that's something not great about us. Magnification or minimization. So we might blow things way out of proportion or maybe shrink their importance. So something happens and it's a big deal and it feels like a way bigger deal in our system than maybe if we interrogated reality it would be. Or something does happen that's not good, maybe from a client or a partner or something that's really hurtful, and we minimize that importance and then maybe forget about it or don't hold them accountable. Emotional reasoning. So we reason from how we feel. So I feel like an idiot, so I really must be one, right? And then I wouldn't say this last one applies to us. It's more like, man, I feel dumb, so I guess I'm dumb. Instead of like, no, I'm not dumb. I might have missed something, or maybe I have a learning disability. My brain works so differently and it's really creative and it just isn't great at test taking, but it's really cool at this. Should statements, I should have done this. As we say, shoulding all over ourselves, right? I should, I mustn't, I ought to, those kinds of things versus I could have done more lead generation. I could have been more disciplined or intentional, right? Which are more empowering and allow us to move forward versus sitting in shame. Labeling. So instead of I made a mistake, it's I'm this, right? I'm a fool. I'm a procrastinator. I'm a loser. I'm not good. This is a big one, right? Because a lot of us, I've found coaching so many years can almost have this like conditional self-esteem, right? It's based on our actions and like our performance versus like I'm good enough how I am. And if I mess up, it's okay. I messed up. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with me or I'm bad or I'm terrible or I have to be perfect to gain approval. It's, hey, I made a mistake and that's normal and I'm human. And then personalization and blame. So you blame yourself for something you weren't entirely responsible for, or you blame other people and completely abandon any kind of accountability and overlook maybe how we might have played into that, or our behavior might have contributed to a problem. And what we'll notice in this, right, we might even say, and this is an interesting one, right? We might even say this might be a little bit of a, let's say, victim mentality, right? You blame other people and overlook ways your own attitude and behavior might contribute. Um, and I would assume, has anybody here been around somebody that you might say has more of a victim mentality, or maybe has, blamed you for something, they can't take accountability? Um, Working in psychology, right? A lot of us have been around that. Working in psychology, and I was studying to be a therapist at one point, and then found real estate. Just that took off. Is that this a lot of times can come from a very fragile like self-esteem, is what this is, and you'll see this if you study certain personality disorders or narcissism, is taking blame or how our attitude might have or behavior might have contributed. Just when you have narcissism, if you have a victim mentality or personality disorder, but it can come from this fragile self-esteem that if I'm not perfect, I'm not lovable, right? So it's not about you. It's if I did something wrong, that means I'm bad, I'm not lovable. Oh my gosh, no. So the psyche does it subconsciously where you don't take accountability because that would collapse your sense of self and all those things. So it's again, we want to hold people accountable that don't do that and set boundaries. But what you'll notice, and I just want to say for anybody that experiences this stuff, this is a survival or a coping mechanism. Doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're crazy, doesn't mean you have some disorder. It means these are adaptations you used at one point that helped you. And that's why you have them, all or nothing thinking. It's either safe or not safe, right? Um, Maybe you dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives because you had executive function challenges your whole life and you were held to a different standard and you just had to push yourself and be hard on yourself all the time because there were no tools and you were just running on fumes and cortisol and stress hormones, or you'd get, grounded because you didn't do what you're supposed to. So again, if you notice these, which as you start to watch for them, you may notice them a lot and it can't even be overwhelming at first. Like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong with me? And just know these are things that helped you. And that's why they're here. So it's not a bad thing if you recognize these. And most people have certain variations of this as well. If you think about just all or nothing thinking, right? Think of our in the past, like our political system, we have like the left versus the right? There's not really any in between. And usually there's people that are one or the other. You have some people in the middle, but again, it's all or nothing because all or nothing feels safe, right? We all think this or we all think this. This is all bad or this is all good. This person's all bad or this person's all good. And you can see it in that. You can see it just in different belief systems. So again, this is very, very common, this all or nothing black and white thinking. And a lot of these are very common as well. So now what do we do about it, right? You recognize it. So the first thing is to recognize it and not, and this is what I'll say too. Here's a key to recognize this because, like I said, if you have neurodivergence, if you have trauma, like I've had a whole bunch of trauma as well. So I had to work really intensely with a trauma therapist on unpacking some of this. I mean, I've been in the trenches with this stuff and done EMDR. And just so you know, if you have trauma, you're not alone. And I want you to know how much progress you can make and how you can really, like, even if it feels like you can never get out of it, you really can. And so one of the big things with this all or nothing thinking is just, again, recognizing when you're in it is the biggest thing. And you'll know that by, it doesn't feel good. There's only two options, right? Either do this or this. It either is this or this. You'll know that with the two options as well. And so when we're looking at this, first we want to identify it, right? And that's the first step. Is how do we unpack this? How do we start to soften some of these harsher pathways? Because you really can build that. So identify the distortion. So if you're having a thought or a feeling that feels really yucky, like you feel hopeless, it feels really extreme, you can't get out of bed, something that feels really strong, that likely, unless somebody passed away and you're really grieving, if you have a very strong emotion about something that's really intense, unless there's a very strong thing that just happened, it likely could be some type of cognitive distortion. But again, we don't want to punish you for that, because here's the trick to this, okay? So you want to train your brain to recognize the distortion, to point it out to you, because right now it's not. So you have that thought, right? That that thought that comes through, it's all or nothing, you're discounting the positives, whatever that is. So this thought comes in, your brain's not flagging it for you, it's just part of your way of thinking, right? So we want to train the brain to recognize it, and the way we do that is by rewarding it. So this is the key, because I've coached people. I haven't crossed the line into therapy because I know what that line is. I've worked in you know uh, deep residential clinical settings and was getting my degree to be in clinical. So I know where the line is, and I've coached people through this without crossing that line. And the biggest thing we want to do is we want to reward it. So when you have a cognitive distortion, let's say you're having one right now. Maybe you didn't have the best year or the year that you wanted, and you think next year is going to be like this too. I should get out of the business, right? Or it's always going to be like this, or it's so hard, or you're kind of in that. So one, it's going to feel yucky. When that comes up and our brain says, "Hey, I wonder if this is all or nothing thinking," or "I wonder if this is predicting the future." If we say, "Dang, I'm doing it again," is that a reward? No, right? We say, dang it, I'm doing this again. What's wrong with me? You're not rewarding the brain, you're creating pain. And our brain does not want pain. So the next time that happens, it's probably not going to flag it for you, right? But if you say, oh my gosh, good job catching that, even if you don't really want those thoughts, but you say, oh, good job. Wow, thanks for bringing that to me. Now you're getting a little dopamine, and the brain, it's like, it's really interesting, but think of it as a separate entity. You're training the brain to bring you these distortions, right? And so we want to reward it, not shame ourselves. So that thought comes up, man, it's going to be hard, and say, ooh, I wonder if this is a cognitive distortion. Wow, good job naming that. Like, good job. And then we write it down. So we want to write down what the thoughts are and then look at them. And for some reason, being able to write that down helps us look at it objectively and say, okay, because really what we're doing when we talk about untwisting our thinking, what we're doing is we're interrogating reality. That's what this is. So cognitive distortions are distortion of the pure, neutral, true reality. And very few people have that true neutral reality. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. It doesn't mean I'm a master of it. I still jump into some cognitive distortions sometimes. It's not about never having them, it's about recognizing more and more. And I would say you may likely never arrive and be just completely pragmatic and neutral, but you could be 75% more, you could be 90% more. There's all kinds of stuff, right? So we want to write it down because it's going to give us that objective perspective. So we do that, we write it down, then we examine the evidence. So instead of thinking, okay, this is true, we want to just kind of look at it. And again, we're interrogating reality. So if we feel like, oh man, the market's going to be so difficult and it's just going to be like it was this last year, and maybe I should get out of the business, we want to list some things down that might oppose that. And we're examining the evidence for everything. Well, you know what? I did get sick for like 2 months, or we did go on that trip, or that type of lead gen that I was paying for dried up and I didn't have another option, or I went through that deep depression for a couple of months for the first time, or somebody passed away, or you know what? This has been a wonky year with all this stuff happening, and it's not going to happen the same thing. So we want to kind of write stuff down and just really interrogate reality and get the evidence for that. And then the double standard method. This is really big as well. So this is number 3. Instead of putting ourselves down in a harsh, condemning way, we want to talk to ourselves in a compassionate way. So this is huge because a lot of us, who here talks more kindly to other people than we do to ourselves inside of our head? Like, who's kinder to other people than ourselves? I think it's probably the majority of us, right? And so if we talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves, how hard we are, or your kids or your nephew or your coworker or anybody, we would probably feel horrible, because there's I see in the comments, like, we really care, and we're so hard on ourselves. That's the majority of us, right? And so when we write that down, we write the examples. Now the double standard is, I want to look at, if a friend came to me with this. So I'm going to kind of like shift my thinking and think, if a friend came to me and brought this problem to me, or how they're feeling, and I saw this list, what would I say to them? And this is a really, really big one. And just, if you are a coach, or you're in a leadership role, or you have a team, or you have a family, or any situation, this is a really great one. Even if you're giving advice to a friend and you don't know what to say, this is something I use in coaching. If somebody brings a situation to me that is very complex, or I think it's best for them to decide, I'm going to say, hey, if a friend came to you and told you exactly what you told me the last 5 minutes, what advice would you give them? What advice would you give them? And that's a really great coaching question. It's a great, question to a friend or somebody you're helping to help them get out of their head and really look at it objectively. So this is a powerful one. And then the next one, number 4, is experimental technique. So we want to do an experiment to test the validity of our negative thoughts. Um, and this is an interesting one. Is we're kind of like playing it out in a sense, and so do an experiment test to test the validity. So and we'll use. I think this is an interesting example. If anybody here has OCD or like intrusive thoughts, which I have, and I have done incredible things with those. I'm telling you, there's so much hope with that. It's really common with ADHD to have rumination or to have OCD or intrusive thoughts. But I used to have a very severe medical theme OCD. So if I got a cut, if I had an infection, I would be Googling, I would freak out. I had anxiety. I almost went to the emergency room. I don't have this anymore because I probably wouldn't meet the criteria. When I'm telling you I've been in therapy, I've been in therapy. I've done some work, because I thought, you know what? Sometimes I went twice a week because I thought I could do this over time, or I could do it really intensively all at once and then enjoy having like less trauma for a majority of my life. So I went really intense in my late 20s and early 30s, like 2 times a week to an incredible trauma therapist because I wanted to like pack it in and really like calm my nervous system down and really enjoy life in a different way. So luckily, I may not meet the criteria anymore, but I had that, right? So if you have anxiety, you become terrified, you're going to die of a heart attack. So they say jog or run up and down several flights of stairs. Like you wouldn't be able to do that if you're really having a heart attack, right? So it's going to prove your heart is healthy and strong. If you have anxiety, like, and we could apply this to real estate, you're terrified of getting rejected. Like somebody's going to beat you up if you call somebody, or if you call somebody and talk to in 2 years or something, you feel bad, call them and expect the worst and see what happens, because it's probably not the worst. So in a way, it's kind of like exposure therapy, is really the experimental technique is the way you could look at it. It's kind of exposure therapy. Do the thing you're terrified of and watch how the result is probably way better than you think it is. So thinking in shades of gray. So this is where we're training our brain to find the middle ground. So instead of the all or nothing, we want to kind of find the middle ground, or that gray instead of black and white. So instead of thinking like, here's this problem of it's going to be terrible next year, I can't sell houses. We think of on a scale of 0 to 100, like how true is that? How true is that? Or how bad is this situation? Well, it's probably a 50. It's not 100. It's maybe a 50 or maybe 70 or maybe 30. It's like, okay, so why isn't it 100? Well, I've been in real estate for 10 years and I know what I'm doing. And, there's some other options, right? So we're going to walk ourselves through. So kind of find that middle ground. This range of a 0 to 100 is a really quick way to pull ourselves out of the black and white, because the black and white wants to say a 0 or 100. It's only one of these two, instead of like, because we know when we think about it's not a 0 or 100. The survey method. This is cool. Ask other people. Ask other people. So talk to others, talk to people who know you, talk to your coach, talk to the person who runs your office, talk to your coworker. Hey, I have all these thoughts that I should just get out of real estate and not do this anymore because it's so difficult. Next year, I'm not going to be able to make it. What do you think? What do you think they'll say? They'll probably be like, what? Are you kidding me? You're great. No, you need to stay in it, right? So we want to like, and talk to people you trust, that's going to tell you the truth. Just kind of jumping back to the medical themed OCD, because I brought that up and that was a huge one I used a lot of these for, is I would go to my mom or I would go to a friend who was a nurse or something, and I would say, okay, does this cut look infected? It was bad. It was after a surgery, and they'd say not at all. And so I would learn to like trust that. I would talk to other people and I'd have to talk to them first before I get something checked. And it's interesting. So the survey method, to ask other people, define terms. So when you label yourself inferior or a fool or a loser, ask yourself, what is the definition of that? What does that mean if you're a loser, or you're not good, or, you're not talented, or whatever kind of label you put? I'm a procrastinator. Like, what is the definition of a procrastinator? Because I bet who here at one point has called themselves a procrastinator before, or said that. I bet it's like almost all of us, right? When it's really executive dysfunction. I would bet money that very, very few of us are actually procrastinators. because procrastination feels good. It feels fun. Whereas executive dysfunction is our brain is not engaging because it's not dopamine producing and there's no fuel to do it. Right. But if we think, what's the definition of a procrastinator? It's like somebody that just sits around all day, doesn't do anything that's important, doesn't really care, mooches off other people, makes excuses, is really apathetic. My guess is if you called yourself a procrastinator, you don't fit those labels. Don't. You don't mooch off other people. I bet you, if you have an ounce of dopamine or fuel in the tank, you're doing something. And if you can't, it's because you can't make yourself. Number 8, semantic method. So substitute language that's less colorful and emotional. So instead of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. This is horrible. Why did I do that? If you can neutralize it a little bit, like, hey, it would have been better if I didn't do that. Or it could have been better if I hadn't made that mistake versus like these absolute extreme statements. So we want to just soften things a little bit and get us out of the extreme thinking is really what this is. Number 9, reattribution. So instead of automatically assuming we're bad and blaming ourselves, we want to think about all the factors that contributed to it. And solving the problem, because if shame worked, it would have worked by right now, right? We want curiosity. So let's say, here's one, let's say you overreacted and was impulsive and you're, too loud or too aggressive or too emotional, or you got angry at somebody really quickly, right? So me might think, oh my gosh, I'm bad. That's horrible. What's wrong with me? I'm impulsive. Instead of thinking, oh, I was totally burned out. I was overworked. I've already been patient with 4 people before that. I'm stressed about this. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. So it doesn't mean that it was okay to do that, but we're looking at all the factors that contributed to that versus this automatic label, you are bad, right? Because then when we have, oh, I was stressed, I was tired, I didn't sleep, then we can say, ooh, I don't want to do that again because I know that's not right. So in order to do that, I need to make sure that I get good sleep, that I'm having better boundaries with some of the clients I'm working with, that I have a cutoff time, and that if I know that I'm that activated, maybe I don't make the phone call right then. Maybe I wait an hour. Right? Do you see how an automatic label and shaming just keeps you stuck? Whereas if you really are interrogating reality, you're going to find solutions and you're going to start to progress. Right. And then number 10 is the cost benefit analysis. And then we'll move to a little bit of Q&A for the last 5 minutes. So cost benefit analysis is list the advantages and disadvantages of a feeling or a negative thought or a behavior pattern. So this is really interesting. So here's one. I must always try to be perfect. Who's had that where we try to be perfect? Right? A lot of us have tried to be that. So what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of always trying to be perfect? If you know you're a perfectionist, which I know is quite a few people on here, sit down with a pen and paper and just write down what are the advantages of being a perfectionist, what are the disadvantages. It doesn't mean that you're going to stop trying, but it might mean that you realize perfectionism is not as helpful. Or maybe you soften it a little bit, or maybe you go for 80% good enough, something like that. Advantages and disadvantages of thinking that I should get out of the business. The market's too hard. What are the advantages? Well, maybe I'll find a different job. Do you like that job? Probably not, unless you want to work for somebody else, or you might find that there's very little advantages to having that thought. So maybe you don't want to have it. Maybe you want to choose something different because we can't always control our first thought, but we can control our second, third, and fourth a lot of times, right? So so there are these things. These are the 10 ways to dismantle that. And then I want to throw this out there as well. So sometimes these coincide with feelings, right? And you'll see some of the stuff on this handout about different feelings, which I'm not going to go into, like thoughts and feelings. And I want to bring the term up called alexithymia. If you've ever heard of that, alexithymia. This is common with neurodivergence, and it can be a difficulty in identifying or naming our emotions. And it's connected to brain wiring, especially if you're on the autism spectrum as well, which I am as well. So identifying what the feeling, we might just not feel good, but we don't know what it is. And so if you have that, some of the things I like to do, okay, so feeling wheel, this is something I've gone to before, and you can just type in feeling wheel, and it can help you identify like how you might feel. It's kind of interesting. But you're welcome to take a screenshot of this, or you can just Google feeling wheel in here. But just if you have trouble identifying your feeling, just know that that's normal. Well, thank you for being here. Appreciate all of you guys so much. Have a good holiday, and then we'll see you in the new year. Oh my gosh, in the new year. Okay. All right. Take care of yourself.